A lot of people have asked me this and I've avoided answering it, but I'll answer this because I promised you beforehand that I'd answer any question.
Are you running a marathon? Oh my god, I could never run a marathon. You sure about that? My god, a marathon is like 42 kilometers, 26 miles. I don't understand those people.
That used to be me, but not anymore. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast. My name is Christian Warwick, aka Warwick runs on different platforms. Thank you so much for being here. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. And it's been a huge week for the Marathon Podcast. A lot of new followers or subscribers, whatever you call them on a podcast. So if you're a new listener, welcome to the Marathon Podcast. And speaking of new followers, if you haven't already, please subscribe, follow this podcast. We really appreciate it. But most importantly, please give this podcast a review. That would be great. I would really appreciate all the sharing or tags, whatever it is, for the Marathon Podcast. Trying to build this to become something bigger than what it is today. And I'm having so much fun with it. So that is the only thing I'm asking for or from you as a listener. Thank you. It's so much fun having this pod and being able to talk to people all over the world. And today's guest is based in or is from Australia. And if you are a part of the running community at all, I think you will know or recognize his name, Matt Fox. He has had a presence online through his channels for years, and he's a 2:18 marathoner, super fast. And he's kind of been gone for a minute, and a lot of people have been asking where he's been, and we'll talk more about that in the podcast. And you can also hear more about that on Matt's own podcast. So today was such a good conversation. I had so much fun with Matt. We were talking for a very long time, and I was left super inspiring. It was great because, obviously, because of time difference, we had the call pretty early in the morning for me, or not super early, 8 a.m., and in the afternoon for him in Gold Coast, I think it is. And so I felt super inspired going out for my last progressive long run before Trondheim Marathon. That is 2.5 weeks out from now. And I kind of just want to let the conversation go because we're talking about that long run, and then he's curious about how that went. And I think maybe, so unless you've been following me on Instagram, you probably don't know how that run went, but I'll wait until after the conversation with Matt to kind of reveal how that went. So enjoy this episode with Matt, this conversation. I think it was a really good one. I think that we touched on some topics that might be not controversial, but people might disagree with the fact that we were even talking about it. But I still found this to be a great conversation, and I learned a lot. And I think that every runner can learn a lot from Matt. So here you go. Here's the conversation with Matt Fox. Matt Fox, welcome to the Marathon Podcast. How are you?
I'm pretty good, Christian. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to be chatting to you. Obviously, we're other sides of the world, opposite sides of the world, should I say? But thanks for having me on.
First, before we dive into everything running, I'm curious, how is your shape right now?
I ran 19 minutes for a 5K 4 days ago, which for people that don't know me might think that's an average time for a 5K. Probably 8 months ago, I was in 14 low shape, although I didn't run a 5K. I ran a 2:18 marathon around that time, which equates to about the same time. So I'm way out of shape. And actually 2 weeks before I ran 19 minutes, I ran 21:20 because I was completely stationary for 4.5 months. I did absolutely no training, and we can dive into why that is. But my shape right now, to tell you the truth, is very far off my best. But I'm working hard every day, every week to get back to where I was. And hopefully by the end of the year or early next year, I can be back sort of chasing those 2:15, 2:16 marathons, which I was doing towards the end of last year.
Yeah, because you are a fast marathoner. You've done some pretty good races over the years. And before we start, I want you to present yourself. I think that most people who are following running, they will know your name, but still, for those who don't know, who is Matt?
Well, my obviously full name is Matt Fox. I started running when I was 17, pretty seriously. I was I would say semi-professional 800-meter runner. I never qualified for the Olympics or World Championships, but I was sort of on the cusp of that that level for a while. And then I went away from the sport when I was 26 for about 4 years and came back to the marathon, half marathon and marathon when I was 31, and now I'm 38. And I started at 2:59 in my first marathon in 2000 and end of 2017, I think it was. 2:59, tried to break 3 hours and just managed, and then chipped away at it over the next sort of, well, it must be 8 years now, and went from 2:59 to 2:51 to 2:44, and then eventually got stuck on 2:20 for 3 years. And I sort of made a public YouTube channel. The channel wasn't specifically about that, but I did a few video series about trying to break 2:20, of which I failed 7 times in a row. And then in October last year, I finally figured out how to break 2:20 and ran 2:19. And then a month later, ran 2:18. And then I started doing quite regular marathons every month for a few months. And then a big disaster struck my life in early March this year, which we'll get into soon. So yeah, that's the overview of it. So I've got a lot of experience in the 800 meters, which is what I was focusing on when I was 17 through 26, and a bit of 1500 meters as well. And then I've gone up to doing the longer distances, of which, of course, I've run quite a few 10Ks as well. Not so many 5Ks. I've managed to avoid that distance somehow. But marathons, where my strong interest is, and I coach predominantly marathon runners. But yeah, I'm really hoping to be able to get down to 2:15 at some point in the future. I think that's where my sort of my limit lies, and that's what I'd like to try and get to hopefully next year.
Yeah, and when you're talking about this, like I used to be a speed skater myself. I remember when I was younger, or from a very young age, I had this Olympic dream. And you did mention that you didn't get to the Olympics, but were you so invested in running back then that was your primary goal?
Yes. In high school, that's when I first started running seriously in year 12. It was off the back of an injury. I was actually trying to qualify to, my dream at the time was to play football, but I got injured. I broke my wrist, which took me to running because I was trying to get fit for football the following year. But I placed fifth in the under 18 Australian Championships in year 12. And then I wanted to try and qualify for the World Championships, the World Junior Championships in 2006, of which I just missed. And then my best position in the open 800 meters in Australia was fifth twice. So obviously you have to place top three, but I also didn't run the qualifying time to qualify for the Olympics. But yeah, twice was fifth in Australia over the 800 meters and once seventh. So you could say pretty close, but if you really know times and you really know 800 meters well, you'd know that I sort of wasn't that close at the same time. But it was definitely my dream, and I was a full-time athlete at that point in time, even though I was studying and working part-time. But yeah, that was the goal, to try and qualify for the World Championships and the Olympics up until 2012.
Something that I've found myself to struggle a bit with, especially having had that dream and it was so strong within me, was to kind of give that up. And I usually say that I gave up on the dream, but the dream was still living inside of me. So it was kind of hard to handle. How was that for you when you decided to not chase that dream anymore?
Oh, it was very difficult, actually. I remember quite clearly after the London Olympics and watching quite a few of my friends qualify and watching the championships itself. I was in London watching the Olympics. I actually got quite depressed for a few months, not really knowing what I wanted to do at that point, and feeling like, I remember quite vividly feeling like I'd wasted a lot of time over the previous sort of 7 or 8 years, which is ridiculous to think now. And very shortly after that, I changed my mind about that perspective. But yeah, I think that because that was my ultimate goal, I failed at it, you could say, and it's a tough goal. I mean, for you as well, to try and qualify for the Olympics, it's something that only such a small percentage of people end up doing, and requires so much talent and so much hard work. But for a few months after the 2012 Olympics, I was in a bit of a bad place, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I was 25, I think almost 26 at the time, and I felt a little bit lost. But hanging around the right people and moving on to different goals helped me just move on. And yeah, very shortly after that, I realized it wasn't a waste of time at all. It was all great experience, and I got to travel the world and got to meet a lot of good people and have some fantastic experiences. And if it wasn't for that time, I would never have started Sweat Elite, which I guess I probably should have said in the introduction when you asked me who I was, which is what I started in 2016, which is really a resource all about professional running training, from articles to podcasts to a YouTube channel. really where people could learn about what professional athletes do in training. And if I didn't spend that time between 2006 and 2012 racing and training at a high level, I wouldn't have had that understanding and background to start Sweat Elite anyway. I think that was really important. And Sweat Elite's taken me, all over the world. There's been big highs and big lows with that, and a lot of challenges, but that's basically paid the bills for a long time for me, and it's what I'm still doing to this day. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that later on in the episode. Before we leave this Olympic journey or the Olympic dream kind of thing, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think that I mean I also have friends who made it to the Olympics who are Olympic champions, right? And sometimes seeing those, like, obviously I'm super happy for them, but it's also at the same time a bit hard. And I was much further away from even qualifying than you were. Like, I was just, I was living as a professional athlete in terms of having 35 hours of training a week at the most. And but it's still, so hard to give up on that. And I'm curious, like, because for me, when I found the marathon, and I found the marathon like 2 years ago, never thought I would run one, and did 2:52, my first marathon, 4 months of training, super happy. And I was like, okay, maybe I have a talent here. Obviously,
That's really
muscle
good.
memory played a big role. Thanks. Yeah. Muscle memory played a big role in this. Like, but there was something about having that goal again and being able to work towards that. And I'm curious for you, because you said you found the marathon when you were 31,
Yes, that's correct.
was it? Yeah. So about the same age as I was when I found it a couple of years back. Um, did you feel like that? It sounds like you maybe got further before in your life, like before you found the marathon, but did you feel like that satisfied some of your, call it, needs that you had when you were younger, when you started chasing those marathon goals?
Definitely. I think between 26 and 31, I was working full time. I worked at an investment bank for an internship, and then I worked at an events company in Finland. I was living in Finland at the time, which is not far from you, obviously.
No.
And I was also working in some startups, and I almost felt like there was something really missing in my life through that time. I couldn't exactly figure out what it was, but I think when I've discovered the marathon, I realized that it's really important for me to have some sort of physical goal and some sort of ability to measure how hard I'm working at some physical goal. And at first, you said you thought you'd never run a marathon. When I was competing in the 800 meters, I remember telling people that I would never compete in even a half marathon, let alone a full marathon. So obviously the tables turned there, and I changed my mind. But yeah, originally the idea of running a marathon was off the back of a friend challenging me to try and break 3 hours. And it's cool to hear that you ran 2:52 after 4 months training, because I think I trained for about the same amount of time, having all that
Cool.
background of 800-meter training and 1,500-meter training, and only managed 2:59. Although I did have basically 4.5 years pretty much off running, between sort of
Hmm.
26 and 30 and a half, 31. But definitely fulfilled something inside me that I feel like I needed. And I think as I get older, I'm really learning that it doesn't necessarily have to be the marathon, even though it still is. But I think having some physical goal and a pretty easy way to measure it is really important for a lot of people, including myself. And it sounds like that's the same for you. But for sure, definitely, I noticed around 27, 28, 29 that I was missing something in my life, and I wasn't really doing any sport at the time. I was just too busy trying to figure out what I wanted to do professionally, and yeah, I think I almost put too much focus on that for a while. But I think it's awesome that I discovered the marathon. And at first, when I ran that first one, I thought that would be the only one that I would run. But I had so much fun doing it and competing in it that sent me down this long path of eventually getting down to running, 2:18 now. Of which, if you'd asked me after running 2:59 what I would eventually run, or what I think I could run at the time, I probably would have said 2:40. So it's cool that it's taken me so far, and it's led me to meet so many great people and learn so many things about myself, and of course the event.
I find it super interesting what you're saying about something being like that you felt like something was missing, and I think that a lot of us can relate to that, and we might not even know what that is. Some people might never find it, like they don't realize that this is what it is, and I think that it's much more common than we know or realize that a lot of people, like, say they played soccer when they were kids, or they had a dream of becoming the new Cristiano Ronaldo, that they still, when they get older, they still have this like need to prove themselves or to have some kind of results. And then I've heard of people finding the marathon, for instance, and then they get to have those goals. And what's nice about the marathon is obviously that you don't have to run a 2:07 marathon or anything like that to feel like you're winning, because you can like a 4-hour marathon can be a big victory, a 6-hour marathon can be a victory, everything can be a victory, which I really appreciate about that distance. You did mention that you were also kind of trying to find yourself professionally with a career like that. Did you feel like that at all satisfied those needs or fulfilled those needs of goals for you, or was it only like the sports or the physical goals that could do that for
It
you?
was pretty much only the sport and only the physical goals. It was almost like I couldn't
Yeah.
figure out exactly what made me tick in the professional space. Like I
Hmm.
said, I did an internship at PwC, which is a professional services company. And then, I enjoyed bits and pieces of that. And then I worked for Helsinki Half Marathon and Marathon in the marketing team and did a bit of work for that events company while also simultaneously working on a couple of different startups, of which they all failed. And yeah, I think there's something awesome about not only the marathon. The marathon's just special because it's such a iconic thing now, right? But I think any sport where you can measure your success, there's no way around, around the ability to pick a certain time, pick a certain goal, do everything that you can to try and reach that goal, and then it is what it is on the day. I think there's something really special about that. And I think that's what drives so many people to the marathon and other events in running, because it's so straightforward. It's so simple. You turn up, you do the work, you learn as much as you can, you run as much as you can, and it's almost like there's no finish line to it as well. Every time you run a race, at least this is the case for me and almost everyone that I speak to, you never feel like you nail the race. There's always something you could do better in the race. I've very rarely heard, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone saying, that's it. That's perfect race. There's nothing more I can possibly do to get any more time out of this. And if you're really competitive, like obviously you and I are, you'll never stop chasing a better result. And I think that's what's kept me going through. I think it's 26 marathons now, and I'm sure there'll be many more, of always feeling like, oh, that little part of that race or that cramp or that section of the race that I missed the fueling, I didn't quite get it right, or that part of the training block I didn't do well, or I was sick, or I missed. There's always something that you can get better. And when it comes to other sports, especially team sports, that's often not really the case, because a lot of those other factors are outside of your control, whereas everything is inside of your control in running and in the marathon. And I think that's the beautiful part of this of the event and the sport.
I love hearing this because I've talked to, obviously, on this podcast to a lot of runners, and some people are very much like, if I get to this time, that's my ceiling, right? And I'm not a big fan of ceilings. I feel like because whenever they say that, I'm like, but how do you know that's your ceiling? Like if you run a 2:25 marathon, how do you know that that's as good as it can get? Like, and if you run a 2:15 marathon, how do you know? And then people are like, yeah, but I just don't feel like I have the potential. But it's like, for me at least, I'm like, well, like you said, you were stuck at 2:20 for a while,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden you do 2:19, and then you're at 2:18, and when you get to those times, those 2 minutes, that's a lot, right? So what? Who's to say that you can't do a 2:12 marathon at some point? I don't really see those limits, and so I love talking to people like you, where you sound like you're the same, where it's just like, let's just go at it and see how fast we can go. And yeah, I appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point in that if you think there's a ceiling there, there probably is, right? But if you let go of that
Yeah.
ceiling, and I'm a bit of a culprit, I wouldn't say I'm the best at this, because I have said publicly a few times that I think 215 is my ceiling, but maybe I should stop doing that. And it's interesting because one thing I learned last year in breaking 220, I changed a few things in figuring out how to break 220, but one of them was, and we can talk more about this if you like, but I focused a little bit on touchy thing, which I feel like people should be a little bit careful of. But I'm a bit of a heavier runner. I'm 6 foot.
Yeah.
I was 73 kilos, 74 kilos when I was racing marathons. And I realized when I was racing a few marathons in Japan at the end of 2023 that everyone around me was so much lighter and thinner than I was. And so then I tried to lose some muscle and fat leading into the races. And I got down to 69 kilos safely and ran 218. And I changed a few other things, but I think that's the biggest factor in my improvement. And I do also think in that 218, I had at least 2 more minutes in the tank, mostly because I led a lot of the first 28K, which isn't ideal, but that was my own fault. There's no excuses. And I cramped a lot in the final stages, of which I'm still figuring out. So I fundamentally believe 216 was possible around then. And so, yeah, I think letting go of the idea of having that ceiling is going to be really important for me, because I said on a podcast in 2018 that my ceiling was 230. And then when I ran 235, I changed my mind and it was sort of sub 225. So yeah, sort of lots to unpack there if you like. But I really appreciate this topic. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a dreamer. I've always been. I think that it's kind of like if you dream about something, you might not get all the way there, but at least you'll get further than a lot of people who are. I don't know if you seen that. There's a movie called I think it's called Iceman.
I haven't seen it, but I've
it's
heard about
this Danish guy, and he says that limitations are perceptions, right? And I think that one of the best quotes from now on was that most people who tell you can't do something, they've never even attempted to try it themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I love that part, because I have a goal of doing a 225 marathon right now. That's like what I'm working towards. And whenever I say that out loud, and I've never been afraid of saying those things out loud, I'm just saying it and I don't even think about it. It's just like, okay, that's my goal. But then most people are like, do you have any idea how fast that is? Like, if you can do that, no, that's not. Those are the reactions you get, because to most people that's not realistic, because they think it's super fast. But then I look back at like just the last 4 months of my training and see the progress that I've had, and I'm like, well, if I have as much progress for the next 2 years as I've had the last 4 months,
Yep.
then I'm at 225, right? Like, so it's I don't know. It's a funny thing with our society too, where people just look at it as what's impossible for them, or what they think is impossible for them. Because I don't even think it's impossible for them, but they like to communicate to us who are talking about those goals too. So
Absolutely.
It's an interesting topic for sure.
It is for sure, and it also it's you have to be a little bit careful about who you surround yourself with when it comes to these sorts of things, because if they're people that do have tight limits on what they believe is possible for them and what they believe is possible for others, it might affect your performance, because belief is such a big deal when it comes to anything, but especially the marathon. And the first thing you need to do in order to achieve a goal is to be able to believe it and see it. And I think what you just said is really important for people to almost listen to again. It's like, you've decided that you think you can run 225. You've looked at your progress in past months and past years, and you really do believe that you can do that. And there's no way, well, I wouldn't say there's no way, but it's going to be very difficult to run a 225 without that initial belief and that initial internalization of thinking, okay, I've gone from here to here. Do you mind if I ask, what are you at now? You ran 252 first, but what are you up to at this point?
Yes. So after my 252 marathon, I had a year of injuries, and then I did a 253 in Boston this spring. Averaged 47 kilometers a week the last 3 months before Boston. So was not a great marathon block there. But now I'm doing a marathon in 2.5 weeks from today. So I think I'm good for like 245. At least that's based on all my trainings. It feels like that. Obviously impossible to say until you actually do it, but I'm running faster than the marathon pace in Boston on like moderate sessions now. So it's
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's realistic, but so I think of myself as more of a 2:45 marathoner, but I'm actually not because I have nothing to to show for yet.
Which marathon are you doing in 2.5 weeks?
In Trondheim, so it's like middle of Norway, my home city.
Okay.
So that will be special. I don't think it's a super fast one, but yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Okay. Good luck to you. I'll be following on Strava
Yeah,
after our call.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I really want to talk more about what you said about that, you know, the weight loss that you did before the 2:18 marathon. I first of all, I would just want to say that I love your approach to running. Like I know that a lot of people might feel like some people are too outspoken, right? Like you say exactly what you think and stuff, but I love that you do that. Like it's so good because I think that sometimes, and I've talked to a lot of my friends in, you know, who are professional athletes about especially in Norway, we're struggling to talk about weight and performances. And not in the way where, I mean, I might be canceled too by saying this, but like, I think that it's fair to tell an athlete that you should lose 1.3 kilos to be better, right? But I feel like if you are able to communicate it in a good way as a coach by saying that it's 1.3 kilos, not 1.4, because that's too much, but 1.3. Obviously, it's hard to measure like 1.3 kilos, but my point is that if you're able to look at it from a performance perspective, it's like you're not overweight and like you're more fit than almost everyone on this planet. But if you want to be an Olympic champion or if you want to do that 2:18 marathon, you might have to get down to this weight because will be better for your performance. And so I'm very curious to hear more about this because I think that if we can have a healthy approach to this, it's much better. And sometimes, at least what I've seen with myself is that I'm like, oh, but if I lose more weight now, that's going to be unhealthy. And then I start looking back. It's like, well, if I didn't have candy on Friday and Saturday, that would have helped. You know, like there are some small things there in my diet that could also help. It doesn't necessarily need to starve. I don't need to starve myself. Um, but before we dive into that, because that is obviously the marginal gains that you were working on to get to the 2:18 from 2:19. But I think a lot of listeners will also be curious about what you did from that 2:59 marathon and all the way down. Like, what did your training look like? How did you approach it? And um, yeah, just that whole journey. If you're able to give a little recap of that.
Yeah, sure. So I trained similar to you for 4 months leading into the 2:59. And one thing I didn't do a lot of then, which I focus a lot on now as a runner and as a coach, is I didn't do a lot of work at marathon effort or marathon pace. I did a lot of easy running. I did a lot of threshold running, LT2, sort of half marathon effort, and a lot of intervals. But at the time, I didn't really know how to train for the marathon very well, and most of my long runs were not very hard. Um, I started to incorporate a lot more at that marathon effort, which at the time was obviously much slower than it was at the end of last year. And honestly, probably what got me down to 2:27 was just turning up and doing more and more volume at all the intensities. So I don't think I did anything overly special for about 4 years there. I just kept doing a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but quite a reasonable amount of volume. I was probably averaging somewhere between 110 and 120 kilometers a week for most of those 4 years. But I really noticed that what was really helping me the most was incorporating, especially when I was sort of 3 weeks out to 8 weeks out from the race, quite a lot of work at that LT1, just below lactate threshold running, and quite a lot of it. So quite extended sections within runs. But I don't think I did anything overly special other than just stayed committed, stayed motivated, and kept turning up for 4 years. I think when I got to 2:25 was when I had to sort of sharpen things. 2:27 at Valencia in 2019, which was when I started to really think about more specific training in terms of what I needed to do. But yeah, then I ran 2:24 in 2020, and then obviously for a year there was no races. And at the end of 2021, I ran sorry, I ran 224 in end of 2020, sorry, and then 220 at the end of 2021. And then, yeah, what was interesting about that build in running 220 at Indianapolis at the end of 2021 is that I actually didn't do a lot of volume in that build up. I did about 110K a week, but a lot of work at LT1 threshold. And yeah, then I was sort of stuck for, like I said, 3 years of running between 221 and 224. And one thing I really noticed when I zoomed out and had a look at photos and videos of different races is that when I ran 220, I was very lean. And I remember weighing myself just before that race. I didn't try to get lean. I just somehow managed to end up being very lean. Obviously was in a calorie deficit a lot of the time. I was about 70.5 kilos. And when I continued on and ran through 2022 through 2024, I was often about 73 or 74 kilos. It didn't seem to matter really what I changed in training. I was always running around the same 222, 223, 224. And then, yeah, leading into Chicago last year, I decided to do a little bit more mileage than normal, up around 160 to 170K a week. But to be honest, I don't think that was the thing that helped me that much, even though a lot of people do think that that's what helped me a lot. The other thing I changed in training towards Chicago was I started to do a lot of hill sprints every week. So very short, sharp hill sprints. I think that helped quite a bit just with improving my top end speed and making sure I wasn't sort of slowing down in terms of top end speed, because I'm 38 now and I was, 30, 37 at the time. And when you get older, you lose that speed, especially the top end speed. But what I really focused on, as I mentioned, was getting down to below 70 kilos or at least 70 kilos by really being strict with my diet. And that's what moved the needle forward, because when I ran 219 at Chicago, it honestly wasn't an all out effort for me. And it was also a little bit warm. I just made sure I got under 220. So I ran right at 219.30 pace until the very end. I didn't take any risks. I didn't put in any surges. I think I ran the last K in 309, which was a bit faster than normal, a bit faster than average. But on that day, if I went all out and took risks, it's possible I could have run a little bit faster. So I boil probably 70% of that down to the weight and being quite a bit lighter than I was in previous years, and maybe the other 30% down to the differences in training that I made. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I think that a lot of people can relate to that. And I remember before my first marathon, I was looking at like calculators for like if you are at say 259 level on the marathon, like if you lose 2 kilos, how much does that amount to in terms of the time? And people might actually be surprised by how much that can be. And then it's important to emphasize, just I guess for me to not be canceled here, that if you lose too much again, then it's not gonna help you. So you need to find that, like you said, that 69 kilos might be a good weight for you, and you are still able to perform. And there might be some trying and error here to figure out what that is, because if you don't have enough, the chances of getting injured or not having enough energy to get through your training might also be there. So, but I also believe that, especially at your level, running that fast, right? It's even more important to kind of start focusing on those things, I guess.
Yeah. You're exactly right. I think it's really important to underscore one thing you just said there, and it's that there is certainly such a thing as going too aggressive on the weight loss. The best example of that, who's publicly talked about it, is Ryan Hall, who's the fastest American marathoner of all time. Even though he doesn't have the American record, he ran 2:04:58 at Boston, which doesn't count as the national record. But he talks about a period of his career where he went too light, and it backfired on him. So there's definitely such a thing as that, and I'm very aware of that. And I've heard of quite a few stories of people that have gone too far that way. They've dieted too much, and they've either gotten injured or they've just not raced as well. And you've said it exactly right then. I think it does come down to trial and error. And if you really want to try and squeeze out as much time as possible by losing weight, you may possibly, I hope I don't get cancelled. I've been cancelled before, so I don't mind being cancelled again. You may find yourself in a position where you have to ride that line and make a mistake and make an error and then learn. I know someone from Germany. I believe he's 213 now. Frank Schauer is his name. And he made that mistake. He got too light. He started running slower. He was stuck on 216, 217. He shared this story with me in Kenya when I was training there, and he was training with me. And he got injured, and then he learned. He gained an extra 3. I can't remember the exact numbers he was talking about, but I think he gained 2.5 or 3 kilos back, and then started running 214, 213. So he learned that where his line was. He went over the line and he came back. And many people listening to this podcast might not want to be this extreme, right? They might not want to be this intense and really try and squeeze every minute out. I've decided to go down that path because it's just something that I find interesting, and I'm willing to make a mistake, and I'm willing to experiment with it. And to be honest, like being a coach, I think it's almost a good thing to learn hard lessons and to make mistakes, because then you can pass those lessons on to others. Because I can hear Ryan Hall talk about these things, and I can hear Frank share these stories, but I think it'll be even more valuable for me to learn these mistakes as well. And I haven't found that line in terms of where my lightest weight is. I actually believe I can go a little bit lighter than this, but it's really important to underscore once again that for anyone listening, do not there isn't such a thing as light as you can possibly be as fast as you can be. That's just not true. But it is definitely a case that, power to weight ratio is a real thing, and if you can lose some kilos safely and you remain powerful and strong and fast, you will run faster if everything else remains the same. It's very simple physics. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm curious to ask, have you decided to sort of focus on this yet? Really trying to find that line, or is that coming in the future, or is it of no interest to you?
No, I'm definitely interested in that. I think that there are a few things that I kind of consider when it comes to it. First of all, I kind of overdid it last year, not in terms of actually losing weight, but trying to, and then also increasing my mileage. And what I realized with that was that then I had pain all the time because like my body didn't really recover between the runs. So I was like, okay, I can't do both these things at the same time. But I also realized that I could adjust my diet in different ways than eating less, which I think is also important to emphasize, right? Like losing weight doesn't necessarily need to be eating less, or like it can also just, to a lot of us, we can change our diet a lot and then still lose weight, and it's in a healthy way. So I think that if I can do that in a healthy way, that's great. And like I said, and I think this goes back to me thinking that there's no ceiling. I'm very much interested in doing everything I can to get faster. So if that is losing weight, great. If that is like running more slow runs, great. Like it doesn't really matter. I just want to get better. But then there's obviously that balance, and you need to figure that out. And you also need to figure out what kind of person, or like what body type is yours. I had Rory Linkletter on, and he was talking about how he's now leaning more into being a more powerful runner, which I think is a great approach, because he said, my thighs are bigger than others. Like I have more there. So I'm leaning into that instead of taking that away and trying to improve on other things. And so obviously for me, coming from speed skating, my thighs are a bit bigger than other runners. So then now my thighs are much, much smaller than they were when I was a skater. But I think it's naive to think that they will ever be stick thin. So it's there's a balance there. But I'm definitely, and I think that's going to be even more as I improve and like get down to those sub 30 to 30 marathons, then that's going to be even more of a focus. But yeah, I think these things are very, very interesting. And it's like you said, it's important for people to remember that it's not necessarily the lighter you can be, the better it is. And I also think that it's important to emphasize that for you and me who are super ambitious, these things might be important to us, right? Because we're looking at how can I run a few seconds faster here, a few seconds faster here. But for those who are trying to do a sub 3 marathon, for instance, it's not like this should be your main focus. I think then there are probably a lot of other things that you can focus on.
Definitely. But I think one clear indicator is just simply looking at your body composition. And if you look at yourself, and this is not easy to do for some people, but if you look at yourself in the mirror and think to yourself, am I carrying extra weight that I don't necessarily need? then maybe you
Yeah.
can lose weight. But if you're already incredibly lean, I'm sure there's more scientific ways of doing this with BMI tests or DEXA scans
Yeah.
or whatever the right way. I'm not very familiar with those, but yeah, I'm sure there's ways of determining this properly. But if you are carrying a lot of extra fat and you know that, then it's even if you are at 3 hours, it's pretty simple. If you do lose that weight, I think one thing is really important to share here about this. I think what I did to lose the weight really worked, and it was essentially carbohydrate cycling. And what that means, I could talk about this for a full episode, but the overview of it is in a minute or less, is that I was massively fueling before hard workouts with very high carbohydrates. And then after the workout, I was having a high amount of carbohydrates and protein. But then when I was after that, on my easy days, which were typically for 2 days, I would go very low carb and quite low calorie. So I would time my calories around the specific demands and needs of the training.
Interesting.
And so when I was having easy days, I was having 2,000 calories, 2,500 calories, even though I was burning 3,000 to 3,500. And at first, it felt pretty rough on the easy days, but my body adjusted and figured it out pretty quickly. But it's very important, and there is never any way around this, especially for the hard long runs. You need to fuel very well before those. And if you don't, you will learn lessons pretty quickly, I think. So I would typically do 2 very hard sessions a week, one on Wednesday and one on Sunday. And the Tuesday night and the Wednesday morning and the Saturday night and the Sunday morning, I would have huge amounts of carbohydrates, rice, pasta, bread, and then on the meal afterwards. But then on Thursday and Friday, and then also on sort of Monday and up until Tuesday dinner, I would go pretty low calorie. And so I was in a big calorie deficit for about 2/3 of the week. But then the other part of the week, I was just completely forgetting about any calorie deficit whatsoever. I wasn't even thinking about it. And that worked because when my body demanded high intensity or very long, hard training, I had the calories and the carbs to utilize. Whereas when it was just doing easy running, because you can do easy running off very, very low calories and very low carb. And so that really worked for me. So I think it's really important to understand, if you do want to lose weight, do not skip out on fueling for the hard days. I think you really must do that. Otherwise it's risky in terms of injury. Yeah, and just in generally, burning out.
Yeah, and so what was your time perspective on this? Because I think that's also a mistake that a lot of people make, and I have no idea what you did, but like that you do it too much too fast, right? Like, so when you started doing this, or how long of a time period did you lose weight?
I lost about 4.5 kilos in about 4 months. I kind of wish I'd started a little bit earlier, because I think it may not have made a difference, but it probably would be better to spread that out a little bit longer, over maybe 6 months. But I just decided to do it 4 months out. So yeah,
But
but I
still,
think
4 months is like one kilo a month. It's not.
correct.
That's not insane. So I think that's also, it's important to say that it's not losing 4 kilos the last 3 weeks before your marathon. It's kind of over a longer period of time.
You definitely don't want to be cramming it into the last 3 weeks. I think a kilo a month is probably even pretty aggressive. But yeah, I think, and I didn't necessarily have, I mean, I had a rough goal of hitting 69, but I wasn't too phased. If I landed at 70, that would have been fine. But yeah, you definitely don't want to be cramming it into a few weeks. I think that's very risky. You want to be spacing it out over sort of 4 to 6 months or even longer. Yeah.
And I think that to a lot of people listening now, they're like, well, I'm running and I'm having fun with this, but I'm not interested in doing these, call it extreme measures. Like, in terms of the training, and you did mention a little bit, but there are a lot of people now where almost at the end of August, and I think a lot of people are preparing for Berlin or Chicago or maybe Valencia. So they're in the middle of their marathon blocks. What for you, what would you say were the most important workouts or runs that you did or that you do in your marathon blocks?
Oh, there's so many, but I think my midweek workout is always a little bit faster than marathon pace. So it's usually somewhere between 3K, 5K, and 10K pace. Some good examples of those were 10 by 1K. I would try and hit them right around 10K effort, 10K pace. I was also doing quite a lot of workouts where I would do sort of float recoveries. So I would do 6 to 7 by 2K with 1K float. And the 2Ks were right around threshold or sort of between right around half marathon effort with 1K recovery at a little bit slower than marathon pace. These sorts of workouts I found really, really beneficial because you're running a little bit faster than marathon pace, some floating, recovering a little bit slower than marathon pace. I did 2400s at around 5K pace. There's lots of different ways you can slice this. And I think just touching on all of those systems, I think was really important for me. Really making sure that I'm ticking the box of running quite a bit faster than marathon pace, or even all the way down to 5K effort and 10K pace and half marathon effort. And I was basically alternating every other week. So threshold, half marathon effort 1 week, this is the midweek workout, and then every other week would be faster than that. Some other examples were I did some 1200 repeats. I think it was 8 of them, right around 10K effort, starting at, maybe slightly slower than that and working down. That was the midweek workout. On Sunday though, on the long run, I would alternate between doing one long run where I wasn't quite at marathon effort. I was sort of doing a steady state long progression run where I'd end sort of maybe 20 seconds off marathon effort. And then every other week, although it became a little bit more frequent when I got closer to the race, I was doing quite a lot of work at marathon effort. So I did 4 by 5K at marathon effort. I did 2 by 10K at marathon effort. I think I did 6 by 3K at marathon effort. And these were all within a 30 to 35K run. So it's sort of a 10K warm up typically, and then 2 by 10K or 6 by 3K or 4 by 5K. So pretty classic workouts. And yeah, there was quite a lot of runs in there that was sort of 35 to 40K where they were just steady state. So my goal pace was 3:15, and they might start at 4 minutes per kilometer and work down to about 3:35 to 3:30 per kilometer at the end. So probably not quite at LT1 threshold, but just off it. They really were a big focus early on in the block for me. So between, say, 6 weeks to go and 12 weeks to go. And most of those other sessions I spoke about were more towards closer to the race, because I think when you're getting closer to the race, you want to be practicing marathon effort and marathon. If you have a goal pace, you want to be practicing pretty close to that goal pace, because the more specific you get, the better it is for your race. And it's very difficult to turn up to the start line if you have a goal of running, say in your case, 2:45. If you don't do anything, especially in long runs on tired legs at close to 2:45 pace, you're going to find it difficult on race day to turn up and do that. Whereas if you're doing quite a lot of training at 2:45 to 2:47, 2:48 pace, which is, sort of 3:53 to sort of 4 minutes per K, especially I think it's really valuable to do that sort of work when you're already quite tired. So maybe towards the back end of a long run, because at the end of the day, you're going to be demanded in the race to run that pace all the way through until the end of the race when you're on tired legs. So really trying to think through what the demands of the race are asking of you, and then training that way during training as well. So, and like I mentioned early on, the other thing I did, which I think helped me quite a bit, was the hill sprints, which I included on Friday in between those two workouts. And that's a session that I got from Renato Canova, who's a very famous coach of elite athletes. And when I learned more about why he was doing that, it made a lot of sense to me in terms of just really trying to improve that top end speed and make sure that you're improving something that Steve Magnus talks about in terms of the speed gap. If you can improve your top end speed when you're in marathon training, those slower paces really should feel easier and more efficient. And so I was jogging to a hill, maybe over 8K, and running usually 10 by 15 seconds as hard as I could with a slow walk jog back recovery, which is almost like sprint training, but I found that really beneficial for me. I noticed that my marathon goal pace and even my half marathon goal pace and 10K goal pace became a little bit easier when I was really consistent at those, just mechanically. And yeah, I think that was really, really useful. And now I prescribe hill sprints to most athletes that I coach, especially in marathon build-ups. Yeah.
What do you feel like the recovery time is after a session like that? Because all out sounds hard, but it's also not like, what do you say, 10 to 15 seconds? So it doesn't need maybe to have that. It doesn't need to have that big of a load, although it seems hard in the moment.
It's interesting.
What is that like?
Because we're not anaerobically very fit as marathon runners, you'd be surprised. It's such a fine line between going 90%, which is sort of like a stride. You hear people doing strides after running. If you really go 100% speed, especially up a short hill, you'll be surprised at how much it takes out of you anaerobically, it was taking me a good 2 to 2.5 minutes to feel like I was fully recovered from those reps. And it's important to be fully recovered during these hill sprints. So if I ran those at 90%, I feel like I could probably go again in 30 seconds. Whereas if you go 100%, you need when I first started doing the hill sprints, I was taking over 3 minutes rest. And as I got a little bit better anaerobically, that came down to about 2 to 2.5. But during the hill sprints, it's actually not overly important how much rest you have. The important thing is to really make sure that you're going very close to max effort or ideally max effort, and you're really putting a lot of force through every stride. So, in a lot of interval sessions, the recovery is really important, right? Like 10 400s or 15 400s or 20 400s. There's a big difference between having 60 seconds rest and 2.5 minutes rest, because your heart rate will just drop so much. Whereas in the sprints, the recovery is not very important. You actually are better off having more than less. So yeah.
What about in terms? So you said that you would do those on Fridays, right?
Correct. The
And then
the
you
long
had your
interval session on
long
Wednesday
run.
and long run on Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you got to Sunday and your long run, did you feel like you were fully recovered from that Friday hill sprint workout?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in the first 1 or 2 sessions, I didn't feel fully recovered, and I strategically planned those long runs to not be very hard. I planned those ones to be the steady state ones where it wasn't close to max effort. It was more like a 70% effort towards the end. But as I got used to the hill sprints and my body figured out how to do them, how to recover from them, I was able to turn up on Sunday and be able to do marathon specific workouts by the end of the block. So it's definitely a bit of a patience game early on. When you're first doing them, it might take you a bit more time, but after 4 or 5 of them, it was fine to turn up on Sunday and do a very hard marathon workout.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I'm gonna start doing those for my next marathon block then.
I think almost everyone benefits from them. Like I said, I hope almost everyone that I'm coaching finds them useful. So I think it's worth doing. But most people don't want to do them because they don't feel like they're making them aerobically fitter, and they're not. They're not making them aerobically fitter, but they are improving their top end speed while they're in this heavy training. And it's also really improving your mechanics, your stride, it's almost like doing a plyometric session if you do it hard out. So I think the main reason why people dismiss them and avoid them is they think it's not aerobic, it's not marathon specific. Whereas there's plenty of research to show that they're quite beneficial. And Renato Canova, who I got the idea from, he has so much success in marathon training, so it's obviously been working for him.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned him, because I posted the other day, like, who do you want on the marathon podcast, and both your names were on it. So that's cool.
I'll be impressed if you get Renato Canova on the internet, because I think he's not much of an internet user.
I realize that that's gonna be a hard one, but I find it interesting when we talk about those long runs. I usually ask all my guests on about the long run, and ironically, I'm having my last harder long run today before the my marathon, and I'm curious about your take on how I'm usually doing it. And I want you to be brutally honest if you don't think it's a good idea. But so I usually start. I have 2 to 3 weeks out. I usually have the last hard long run, and then I typically go. I want it to be progressive. So today, like you said, my target pace will be 3:55-ish at the marathon. Based on my previous workouts, it could be that I'm better than that, but that will be my targeted marathon pace as of right now. And then my plan is to start out at 4:10 pace, so 30K, 4:10 pace for the first 10K-ish, then down to 4 flat, and then 3:50 at the end, or maybe even a bit faster if I can at the end. But my goal is to feel good when I finish. I've had some previously for the other marathon blocks where it's been all out, and I've been so tired that I'm like, how am I gonna do this for 42 kilometers? So I'm almost puking after, which I think was a bit too much. But today is that progressive run that I explained. What do you think of that?
if you can manage 10K at 4:10s, 10K at 4 minutes, and 10K at 3:50s as an average of 4 minutes, which is 2:48 marathon pace, I think that you're probably in shape to run slightly better than 2:45. I think it's a great workout.
Mhm.
I mean, are you doing any warm up, or are you getting straight into 4:10s?
I'm going straight into 4:10s
Okay.
because at this moment that kind of feels like a bit faster than jog. That's like my when I'm doing my threshold right now. I'm between 4 flat and 4:10 on the float, the 200-meter float between the case. So
Well,
uh,
it sounds like
yeah,
you're definitely in at least 2:45 shape based on everything that you've told me. So that's awesome, especially given that you had that rough year of injuries and you've bounced back and figured out how to move the needle forward now. I think that's a great workout. I mean, I did something very similar in the build up to Chicago. You've made me remember one of the workouts I did. I can't remember the exact paces, but I did the same thing, 30K going slightly, no, I did 30K going every 5K slightly faster.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
my goal pace was 3:15. Sorry, it was 3:19. 3:15 is a 2:16 marathon. 3:19 is a 2:19 marathon. And I think I got down to running 3:18s in the fourth 5K block. And then I went
Hmm.
3:15s and then 3:11s. So very similar to
Oh,
what you're doing.
yeah,
Starting the first
yeah,
10K at, I think I was 3:36, 3:33. So yeah, very similar. So I really like it. I really like the
yeah,
workout that you've got planned. I think
yeah.
that'll be good. Hopefully it's not too warm for you. And yeah, I'm looking forward to following that on Strava after this.
Yeah, I hope it will be a good one. And because my next question is about staying free of injuries, and like my marathon block has been perfect, and then I've been starting to feel niggle in my calves, and I hope it's nothing serious, but I'm still curious about your because like I've been running for a lot, like for a long time now, for 4 months without any niggles at all. It's been so good. And on one of my runs previously this summer, I was like, I wonder how it's possible to get injured. Like this feels so good right now. I don't see myself ever getting injured again. And then like obviously a month later, I'm like, oh, now I can feel it, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And I think a lot of runners can relate to that. For you, you obviously increased your mileage and you've been running faster, so the mechanical load is greater. Like, how have you been dealing with preventing, but also, yeah, or just making sure that you haven't been injured? Although I'm sure you've faced some of those things yourself.
Yeah, it's a very not a very straightforward topic, this one, because there's definitely ways you can avoid being injured. I think that they're probably nothing new to people. Focusing on sleep, focusing on nutrition, making sure that you're eating very well before workouts, and really making sure that you're listening carefully to your body and you're not, lying to yourself around how you feel, taking rest days when you really need to, as opposed to chasing some arbitrary weekly mileage, I think, goal. I think that's a mistake. But at the end of the day, I think something that people often don't want to admit is that injuries are sometimes just a part of the game and a part of the journey, and they're a little bit unlucky. I think I coach one athlete now that's training to try and run 225, and he's just recently picked up a niggle in his calf, and he knows this. He flat out said to me, he goes, "I think that I just pushed the needle a little bit too hard. I've been listening to my body. I've been taking rest days, but I think this is just a little bit unlucky that I'm dealing with this tendinopathy issue in my calf now." And he's managing it. And it might be the same thing for you. I think sometimes injuries just come about as a result of just being a little bit unlucky. But there are so many things that you can do, as I've mentioned, to try and avoid them. But some people are just injury prone. I mean, for quite a long time, that was me. Between 2019 and 2021, I had two injuries back to back. I had Achilles tendinopathy and then very bad shin splints. And to this day, I don't exactly know what caused them. I didn't really change anything. I just kept running and they just sort of appeared and then they went away. And to this day,
Yeah.
I'm not super sure why that happened. I think you'll struggle to find a runner that's been running seriously for 3 years or more that hasn't dealt with an injury. I think they're just a part of the journey, and I feel very sorry and very sad for people, especially that have a lot of issues with bones. I'm fortunate that I've never had any bone stress injuries and no stress reactions, but I know people that just have them back to back to back, and that might be as a result of something to do with a deficiency in their diet when they were younger. It can be to do with maybe they didn't do any intense work on their legs when they were younger. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this field, but I do know that part of this is just luck. But you can do a lot of things to prevent them, and I've sort of already mentioned those things. I think the biggest one is just not arbitrarily following a weekly mileage goal. I think that's something that gets a lot of people into trouble, because once you do that, you stop listening to your body, you stop taking rest days when you really need to, and you're just running with a blindfold on, basically, and just trying to find that mark without caring about how you feel. And I think that's not ideal.
No, I agree. I've found myself now. I had like higher mileage than usual earlier this summer, and then it was super hot, so I had to adjust because my body just didn't like the heat. And I know that a lot of people are just pushing through, but I'm like, I'm a big fan of just listening to your body and the signals the body sends you, and then it's been a bit less, but then I've also had progress every week, and that, at least for me, that's the most important thing. If I see that I have progress every week, I kind of know that, okay, things are good. And also trying to listen to it when I start feeling a niggle and not push it too much. But there's also a balance there, right? Like, because like you said, sometimes just running, I had the weirdest thing where like every week or every day up until Boston Marathon this year, I had pain in my hips, my knees, my calves, like everywhere. And then just after Boston Marathon, the day after, everything was good. Like I ran Boston, no pain in Boston. And ever since, there hasn't been, like, I don't know if like my body just needed that hard marathon to understand that, okay, and now we're running. But it's the weirdest thing. Doesn't always make sense.
Running doesn't always make sense, and I've heard stories similar to yours. That's really interesting, because it's not a huge surprise to me. Like I said, I've heard of that before, but yeah, hopefully you can be injury free, that niggle not get any worse leading into this marathon. And yeah, for anyone listening, I think if you are injured and you're dealing with it now, I think you try and learn from these things if you can, but a lot of it is just randomness and luck. And it's something that I don't hear said very often on podcasts or in content. I think people try and determine an exact reason for every injury, and a lot of the time there isn't one. It's just, it is what it is, and it just happens. And it's a part of your body adjusting to what you're trying to do. Yeah. I think that was the case with my Achilles and the shin splits.
I think what you said there can't be said enough. Like, because I have a friend who's been helping me a little bit with just like hooks on social media, like how to make people watch your videos. And then we were talking about how to increase your mileage without getting injured. And he had the script for me, and I was like, sorry, I can't say this because it's not true. I don't really know why I've been able to. Like, I know that I've been more consistent. I know that I've been running more. I know that I've been strength training more, but I don't know exactly why I'm able to run more now than before. There's nothing I can prove that's like, this is why. And so I think what you said there about like not necessarily having a recipe for this is how you do it. It's like, it's individual like differences, but also I don't know, time of year or time in your life, whatever it is. So it's a weird thing.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you've determined that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it's also important to just like not tell everyone, oh, I did this, so you can do the exact same thing, because it's not always the case.
That's very true.
Yeah. We talked for an hour already, so I'm not going to keep you here for that much longer. But I have a few more questions, and one just quickly before we end this, like marathon running and injuries and all of that. I know that you were doing 5 marathons in 5 months, and you were running fast still, and in the running world, that might be like a controversial thing to do, because a lot of people are like, oh, you shouldn't do more than 2 a year and all of that. Can you say something about why you decided to do that and how that affected your body?
I decided to do it because I'd done 2 or 3 marathons a year for quite a few years. And I've always been inspired by a Japanese runner called Yuki Kouchi, who races very regularly. He races 2 to 3 times a month, not always in the marathon, but He tends to run somewhere between 10 and 15 marathons a year, and he's just doing something different. He's turning up and he's racing. He often uses races for training, and I just decided that I'd wanted to try and do something similar. I'd noticed that other runners like Hendrik Pfeiffer from Germany, he was racing. I think he raced 7 marathons in a year, or maybe 7 marathons in 14 months. And I just thought to myself, we're so used to this traditional long build up marathon recovery period. Can it be done a different way? Can you improve in the marathon by racing back to back and very frequently? And I just decided that was an experiment I wanted to run. And it's a shame that it came to an abrupt end when I was in Japan. And we can, if you've got time, you can talk about that. Otherwise, we can leave it. But yeah, I did 5 marathons between October and February. Unfortunately, I dropped out of the last one because I had quite a severe problem with my asthma. It was very, very cold in the Osaka Marathon, the final one. But I managed to run 2:19, 2:18, 2:19, and then 2:20 4 months in a row, which was good. And in Osaka, I feel like my shape was really there to continue running 2:18 or faster. I just got a little bit unlucky with some issues with the asthma and it being very, very cold and dry there, so I had to drop out. I was really struggling to breathe around halfway. But I think it's something that I see more and more people doing. I think it's definitely more doable nowadays with understanding of nutrition, and also with the super shoes. It's much easier to recover. And so I understand that for people that are working full time, yeah, it might be very difficult to comprehend or even think about doing that. But for people that aren't, and for people maybe that are studying or whatnot, I think it's an interesting experiment to see if you can improve by training a different way, by basically using your marathons to propel you forward to the next marathon, and see if you can work down in terms of personal best, because that's what Yuki Kochi has done. He has gotten down to running 2:07 by racing very, very frequently, and it worked for him, and he's become very well known as a result of it. And I've been watching his progress for many years, and it's just something I thought would be interesting for me to try. And hopefully I can get back
Yeah,
to being in good shape and try it again sometime next year. Yeah.
I think it's super cool. And I agree with you. And I think that there are so many, like in the running world or in the world of sports in general, it's easy to be stuck in this traditional way of thinking, right? Like you're like, we've done it like this forever, or this is what's worked for years. So this is how we're gonna do it going forward. And I think it's so important with the runners that you mentioned, but also like yourself, kind of challenging that a little bit and showing that it's possible, because a marathon can be a great way to almost, or obviously to make you run faster for the next one. And nothing, there's, I don't know, at least for me, I think that if I did a marathon tomorrow and then I did another one in 3 weeks, it could easily be that the one in 3 weeks is faster than the one tomorrow, and that it wouldn't really affect me. But obviously you have to be used to running. Like I think it's harder if you just went on and like, oh, tomorrow I'm gonna run my first ever marathon, and then you keep on running like 100K a week and you've barely done any running before, then it's different. But yeah, I like that approach.
It's definitely something I wouldn't recommend. I've been doing 2 marathons back to back. I think even people that are relatively new to running could do that, but doing them like what I was doing, you have to remember that I have a long history with running. I ran for 8 years at 100K a week back when I was younger, and I've been running for 7 years, probably an average of 100K again. So that's 15 years. So lifetime mileage is a big deal, and it really helps with recovery. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend anyone that's new to running to try that. But I think the back to back, just 2 marathons, as I mentioned, is something that people could do, and I see people do it quite regularly successfully. But it's a different ball game
Yeah,
doing them every single month like I was.
yeah, definitely. And you did mention Japan, and we have to talk a little bit about it. Just to give a very quick recap, you sent yourself some THC. Was it gummy bears
It was,
or
yeah.
what? Yeah.
It was actually some
To,
tablets, very small tablets. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. To Japan, and that caused some problems. Before we jump into the problems there, one thing that I actually was curious about was that I don't do the THC tablets or anything like that, but you talking about it openly, I was like, isn't that like on the list of WADA? And then I realized that it's not on the prohibited list in competition, but like, or it is for competition, I guess, but not in general. So So for you, because if I understood it correctly, you were taking some of those to just improve your sleep a little bit, right?
I originally started taking it actually because I was recommended to do it for my Achilles. Now, this was when I was in Colorado, where they can prescribe it as a, medically, and it's also retail in most of the US, but it was in Colorado. Nothing was helping my Achilles tendinopathy, and then I was just randomly told by someone that it helps their tendinopathy, and I tried using cannabis, THC and CBD together,
Mm-hmm.
and my Achilles problem went away pretty quickly. And I concluded
Wow.
that that really helped that situation. And ironically,
Mm-hmm.
I've used THC quite frequently since then, and people can judge that either way. But remember, in the USA, it's legal everywhere I was, and you can buy it just like
Yeah.
you buy alcohol. And ironically, I haven't had any tendinopathy ever since, even though I struggled with that a lot before I was taking THC. And then I noticed that my sleep really improved over that time. It became a lot more consistent. And so I'll be honest with you, I haven't shared this, although I did share this on my podcast recently. I became a little bit dependent on them over time, much like someone would become used to or get into the habit of having a glass of wine or two every night,
Mm-hmm.
which I know many people that do that. I was sort of doing the same thing with cannabis, of which I'm not really proud to say now. But at the time, it wasn't really causing any major problems in my life. It was just helping me sleep, and it was, in my eyes, it was helping keeping tendinopathy away. But the problem arose. Yeah, this is probably a bit of a shocker for people that haven't heard my podcast where I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. But I had a very stressful situation happen just before I went to Japan at the end of February. I was dealing with an immigration issue with my visa when the Trump administration came in. He changed the timelines of the green card, which really threw a lot of my plans out. I'm not going to go into the details because it's a bit of a boring story, to be honest. But in order to deal with that stress and try to also deal with the jet lag of having a 6 hour time change from the US to Japan, I decided to bring some THC with me in a package to Japan. And before I left to Japan, I knew that it wasn't sold there and I knew that it wasn't allowed there, but I didn't realize how strict they were about it in Japan. When I arrived, the package didn't arrive. I got a note saying that it was delayed at customs. That worried me a little bit. And I researched to see if I could possibly buy it in Japan, whether I could see a doctor and they could prescribe it to me. And when I researched it, when I was already there on day 3, I learned that it was strictly illegal and there was prison sentences for importing it. And that really worried me. I thought to myself, why didn't I research this in detail last week or the week before? So I ended up racing the Osaka Marathon. I unfortunately dropped out. I went skiing for a week in Hakuba. That was always planned. And when I turned up to the airport to fly out of Japan, I was arrested and I was detained for 4.5 months for having 1 gram of THC sent to me. It was actually half a gram, which to people in some parts of the world will think that's crazy, and other parts of the world they will think that's not crazy. I had to wait for 4.5 months in a detention center for a trial. And I was told by a lawyer that I had to hire in that time that at the trial, because it's a personal amount of THC, that I wouldn't have to stay any longer and the sort of sentence would be suspended because that's how Japan deal with it. You actually get a longer term jail sentence if you are obtaining a large amount and you are deemed as, or potentially deemed as, selling it. But of course, that's never even entered my mind. I was only taking it for myself. So yeah, a very difficult period of my life. I've only just been home for a month now. I've had, nothing like that occur in my life before. I've avoided all, you know, I've avoided being arrested up until this year. And yeah, very, very difficult situation. I'm more than happy to answer any questions about it. But that's what stopped my training and racing in its tracks at the start of March. It was March the 4th that I was arrested at the airport. And yeah, it's such a almost bizarre realm of the world when it comes to laws around this particular substance, because as I mentioned, in some parts of the world, and this is growing every month and every year, it's legal and it's sold and it's at retail and it's viewed within the USA. This is definitely the case. It's sort of socially viewed kind of similar to alcohol, but it's got more medical, alcohol has no medical benefits, but people view it based on research and understanding of science, people view it as a medicine, and it's a retail medicine. And in Europe, there's pretty much no criminalization of it anymore. You know, they might get you might get a fine, or you might
Mhm.
get it confiscated. Same in Australia, but in parts of Asia, they're still very conservative, and they take this stuff very, very seriously. They put cannabis and THC on the same level as heroin and cocaine, which to anyone in America, that's crazy. Whereas to people in Japan and people in Asia, that's just the way it is. So yeah, very, very difficult period of my life, and that's part of the reason, or the main reason why I'm now in 19-minute 5K shape and getting back into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And first of all, I'm happy that you're safe home and that things are okay now. And it's very interesting what you said. First of all, I think that for people who want to listen to the whole story about this, they can head over to your podcast episode about it, because it was a good one, and you explained everything very well, I think. And like I told you before we started recording, one of the things that I appreciated was that. Uh, it's so easy, I think, when you live in a country where you take things for granted, like regardless of just this specific thing, but you take it for granted with whether it's like women's rights or whatever. You just like, oh, it's like this here. And then unless you've read a lot about it in the media, you might not think that that's the case where you're going. So because I'm not sure what it would have been like here in Norway. It's not legal, so I'm not sure if you would have. I don't think they would have arrested you, but you might have been deported immediately if they caught something like that in the mail. I don't know how that what that's like, but yeah, I appreciate like you being so open about it, because I think that, and especially to Americans, like you said, where it's so increasingly normal, then it's easy to forget that the rest of the world isn't like that. But it also, like when you were talking about this, it makes me curious about like when you got into, or you were detained in Japan, and I remember reading and hearing on other podcasts, because obviously we didn't know what was going on. You just we didn't hear anything more from you. You're pretty visible on social media with the podcast and everything, and then all of a sudden there's like no news from you. How was that after, like when you got out? Like, did you have tons of messages from people being concerned, and how was the reaction, or how were the reactions after, both after your podcast episode but also after coming home from Japan?
Yeah, lots of interesting questions there. I opened up my Instagram to many messages, because there was a bunch of messages around the end of March, because I was talking on the podcast frequently and on Instagram about the marathon a month, right? And I raced Osaka Marathon on the 23rd of February, and then I was going to race the Rome Marathon on the 16th of March. And I shared that, and so there was a flood of messages around the 16th until maybe the 21st of March of people going, "Are you okay?" Obviously, people were probably looking to track me on the tracker, and I just wasn't there. There was no Strava log. My Strava log stopped in its tracks on March the 4th. So there was probably about 40 or 45 messages around that time, including Christian Ulrichsen, who you probably know. I
Yeah.
remember opening up his message to say, "Are you racing? What's up? Are you okay?" And then the news broke about it, of which ironically I didn't really know about until just last month. I didn't know how much news there was, but it was all over the Australian news and all over the running news around April 10 to 12. That was when it was shared all throughout the media, and it was on Channel 9, and it was all the news in Australia. And then I got a whole flood of messages around April 12 to sort of end of April, of people being like, "I've read the news. Is everything okay? Let me know." Probably 150-ish messages all through the different apps. Yeah, and I got them all. I couldn't access my devices until I left there on July the 23rd. And I didn't even know until I got out of there that it was so in the news. My mum and my wife told me that it was in the news, but I thought maybe a couple of running channels talked about it a little bit, but I didn't realize it was all over the main news in Australia. And so quite a few of my friends that are not even in the running world reached out to me and sort of said, I've seen it in this in the news. Are you okay? Yeah, it was such a bizarre time of my life. I had to just sit in a room stationary for 4.5 months doing absolutely nothing but read and write. To this day, I don't know how I got through it. I don't know how people get through it that are there for years. Um, it wasn't a prison, it was a detention center, as I said, which is slightly different. I would even argue the detention center was, I mean, I've never been to a prison, but I've only ever watched movies. I would argue that the detention center situation was maybe worse because even though it wasn't a cell so much as a with bars or anything, it was just a basic room. I was basically in solitary confinement for that whole time. I couldn't talk to anybody. There was no socializing with anybody else, even though it would have been difficult for me in Japan. There's not much English spoken there. But I was given meals to the room, and I only ever saw someone once or twice a week, and that was a lawyer for like half an hour where I could speak. So it was really it was it was almost quite inhumane. And the
Mhm.
Japanese system when it comes to detaining, because that's the way that everyone that comes through the criminal system is dealt with. They're detained in a detention center until their trial, and then if they're given a prison sentence, they're then sent to a jail. I've obviously learned this as I was there. Everyone goes through that, and I've also learned that the Japanese system is criticized globally because of the solitary confinement nature of the detainment part. And of course, before March 4 and I got arrested, I had no idea about any of this. I thought to myself, if I get caught with such a small amount of THC, they'll probably find me and they might deport me. But I even thought maybe not even that. And how wrong I was. I mean, I feel so stupid even saying that now because it only takes a 10-minute search online to find out. It's actually not super easy to find out through Googling. It's a bit easy to find out through AI apps. And that's because most of the laws are written in Japanese. But
Yeah.
it's pretty straightforward if you want to learn. And it was just very reckless of me. So yeah, definitely regret it.
But I'm not sure if you mentioned this in your podcast, but how is it in terms of like if you want to go back to Japan? Are you able to now, or are you like
10
banned
years.
from Japan for a while?
A lot of people have asked me this, and I've avoided answering it, but I'll answer this because I promised you beforehand that I'd answer any question. I'm banned for 10 years from Japan, so 10-year
Okay.
period. Yeah, because apparently 4.5 months for half a gram is not enough. But that's the case with any. I also learned that any foreigner that is committed and given a sentence, even if it's suspended, which mine was, it's the same for everyone. So they didn't give my
Okay.
case
Yeah.
any individual ban. Any foreigner that comes through
Mm.
that system and goes to a trial and given a suspended sentence or a true sentence is banned for 10 years or banned for life if it's an extreme case. But the minimum is 10
Yeah.
years. So yeah, there's no Tokyo
Wow.
Marathon for me anytime soon.
No. You know, like you did mention watching movies and seeing prison cells and stuff, and in a lot of movies you see people like, okay, they go to prison and then they start working out push-ups in the cell and all of that. And so like I assume that when this happened, marathons were not really the like what was on top of your mind, but were you able to like work out in that room at all, or like if you wanted to, could you have done like some uh I don't know, I guess not running but any activity, or was that like?
I mean, you could obviously do push-ups and you could do exercises in the room in terms of just basic squats or some calf raises. There was sort of a ledge there that you could do them on. But to be honest, I lost all motivation there to do anything like that.
Mhm.
I don't know why. I look
Yeah.
back and kind of wish that I did, but I think because I didn't know how long I was going to be there for some reason,
Mm.
that really was difficult to deal with
Yeah.
because I got
Yeah.
told, I think about 5 weeks before my trial, that that's when the trial will be. So for several months there, 3 months, I had no idea how long I was waiting there, and that's very normal in Japan
Yeah.
for some strange reason. Yeah, it's weird. I lost all motivation to do anything like that. Which who knows why? Now I looking back, I wish
I
that
th-
I kept doing some exercises.
I assume that if you knew for sure, okay, there's gonna 4 months, this is how it is, but with all the unknowns, I think a lot of people would do the exact same thing and not really work out.
Mm. But you're right. You hear of
Uh,
people being detained and in prison for years who go really hard on the push-ups and stuff. I don't know what it was. I had, of course I had all the time in the world to do it, but for some reason I just had a really difficult time getting motivated. And
yeah.
I think just the way it was so solid. I don't know. There was just something about the environment there that was just really difficult to find that motivation to do it. I was reading all day,
Yeah.
which was, in a weird, it might sound strange, but I used to be an avid reader when I was younger, and haven't been reading much lately. Mostly, I think that's the case with many people. And it was one upside was it was kind of nice to actually rediscover that love for reading. And I think I read 32 books when I was in there. So
Wow.
I didn't exactly yeah, it was roughly one every few days. I didn't exactly sit there
Yeah.
and do nothing. So that was
No.
one small benefit. Yeah.
And then moving back to what we started the whole conversation with in terms of your shape and where you're at right now. And this is where I think it's so interesting because here we have, and I've talked a lot about muscle memory, right? Like your body remembers where you were. And so like if you just look back at the last month and the progress that you made in a 5K, like you said, even though it's far from where you actually were, it's still a lot of improvement, which you never could have had if your body hadn't been at a certain level before. And so now that you've been working out, how do you see like so over the last month, but also going forward, your progress? Do you yeah, I guess this is a perfect example of someone who's just like cold turkey on running kind of for 4 months and then trying to get back to that shape you were in.
Yeah, I think I was shocked when I first started running, which was the day I got back. I tried to run the day I got back. For some reason, I thought that I would be able to probably run something like an 18-minute 5K on day one. I don't know why I thought that. I just did. For some reason, I thought getting to a point that I was and running, 2:18 marathon, I thought there's only so far I can go backwards. Day one, I tried to run 5K and I ran the first K in 5:30 and I had to stop. I was completely exhausted. And it was then that I thought, okay, this is actually a very different ball game to what I thought. I didn't even bother. I just stopped the watch and basically walked, jogged the rest of the time. I think the next day I ran 4K at about 5:30. I think I had a day off and then ran 5:30. So, I built up to doing 20K on the weekend, the day after the 5K that I mentioned when I ran 19 minutes. So the improvement has been pretty rapid. I think it was on it would have been Saturday afterwards. So on day 10, I ran 21:20 for 5K at a park run. And I want to do a 5K roughly every 2 or 3 weeks to track that progression and see how fast I can move back down to hopefully 14:30 or 14 low, which is what I think I was at towards the end of last year. And so 19 minutes on the weekend. Yeah, I wouldn't expect that I'm going to continue to take off a minute every week of a 5K. That'll obviously slow down probably from now. But I hope in 2 weeks I can run under 18 minutes and then probably 2 or 3 weeks after that, hopefully under maybe 18:15. I haven't really thought about it exactly, in terms of goals, but I'm just really running to effort at the moment. But I think it probably will take me through until January, so a good 5 months, I would expect at this point to get back down to that shape. And then that will hopefully set me up well to do a marathon in somewhere around April to July. Because I've always thought to myself, getting into good 5K shape first, I think is very, very beneficial for running a good marathon. You don't have to do that, but I've always tried to do that. And before Chicago Marathon last year, when I ran 2:19 and first broke 2:20, about 3 months before that, I didn't race a 5K, but I focused very heavily, on 5K training in the months leading up to that block starting. Sorry, the lights just fallen over, but yeah. So I think
You're good.
that's the goal now. Yeah, to get back into good 5K shape by January, February, and then look to run a good marathon 3 to 4 months after that.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure your muscle memory will help on that and get you back to where you were. But it's like you said, very interesting how because I think that especially when you've been a 2:18 or you are a 2:18 marathoner and then all of a sudden 5:30 pace feels hard. That must be, yeah, that must be a weird sensation,
It's
like
very
a
weird.
weird feeling. Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
weird, and it's even weird now to be doing intervals when I'm running 3K pace and 5K pace, or effort, should I say, and I'm still quite a way off my marathon PB pace. It's very strange.
Mhm.
It's very weird in the mind to be
Yeah.
running all out, and I physically can notice my speed is much slower than running my marathon goal pace.
Yeah.
It is something
Yeah.
that's very difficult to put into words, to be honest. I tried to write something on my Strava
Yeah.
the other day about it, and I couldn't quite word it. I think I just put it's a bit of a mind fuck because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I assume that in some ways this situation could also make you a better coach, though. Like make you understand things better, help athletes who are maybe not coming back from Japan after 4 months and the situation you were, but like injured or family situations or things like that. And the last thing I just want to ask you about, because you did mention Sweat Elite, and yeah, you have a podcast, a YouTube channel, but you're also doing a lot of coaching. And uh, can you just say something about that? And I know you mentioned in the last episode that you lost some of your athletes while you were in Japan. And like, because my thought when I listened to that, I was like, oh, I really hope people will contact Matt and get some help from him, because yeah, I think a lot of people benefit from that, and I yeah, I just like you as a person. So I don't know, like, can you say something about Sweat Elite and your coaching?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, Sweat Elite really started as a passion project or just a blog. In 2016, I started writing articles about training and interviewed athletes, and that turned into a podcast in 2018, of which we've done, I think it's close to 200 episodes now. And then I started a YouTube channel in 2021. And yeah, really trying to dive deep into learning about professional training. Over time, I've learned that there's a lot of big players in that space now. And I think the rise of Strava and the rise of other podcasts have made me pivot a little bit more towards sharing my own journey through Sweat Elite, which people have found very interesting. There's so many other podcasts now interviewing professional athletes and blogging about professional athletes training. And back when I started, there really wasn't. And even when I started the blog in 2016, 2017, end of 2016, it was very few professional athletes were on Strava. Strava was really just an app for cycling at the time. I remember very vividly starting Strava in 2017, and there was hardly any runners on it. So over time, it's almost been commoditized a bit in terms of the content that I was producing. And one thing I've found a little bit challenging too is I'm Australian, and I've tried to find ways to live and base myself in Europe and the US legally, immigration wise, and it's been very difficult actually. I've had a hard time finding the right visas to live places, and that's caused me to have to move a few times. So yeah, back in Australia now and focusing more on my own journey. But yeah, Sweat Elite's been a long journey of over 7 years now, with lots of highs and lots of lows, and learned a lot of things and met a lot of great people. And yeah, the future of it, I'm not super sure when it comes to the video side. The podcast at the moment is mostly sharing my journey and my colleague Luke's journey. He's a 224 marathoner from the US, even though he's Irish. And yeah, people have been really enjoying the podcast we've put out. So we'll continue to do that. But on the video side, I'm still really thinking through what I'll do, because there's been a mixture of athletes training professional and then my own journey. And one challenging thing that I found after filming and producing videos about professional athletes over sort of a 2.5 year period was I sort of covered all the people around the world that were interested in doing it, and then it was repeating them again and again. And I think
Yeah.
that's difficult to stay engaged with that. So that's the challenge there. Yeah, there's only so many pro runners out there, and after about
Yeah.
2 years, all the athletes that were receptive to doing it, I'd already sort of covered and filmed. So that was it
Yeah.
was at that point that I started to do a bit more on my own journey to try and break 220. And I think people enjoyed those 7 video series as I did building up to races. And yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's probably where the future lies.
Yeah. There's a lot of inspiration in that.
Hmm.
And for the listeners listening to this, like if they watch your series or listen to other podcasts or just follow your journey in general, they might be like, oh, this sounds like a perfect coach for me. And I know that you do a lot of coaching. What does your coaching look like? How do you approach that for athletes approaching you?
Yeah, I've been coaching. Well, I've been coaching for about 17 years, but I've taken it much more seriously over the last 3 years. I really appreciate what you said before because we had to announce early on that I was unable to coach. I'd be coaching through my wife, who was going to be communicating to everybody, and a lot of people didn't want to do that, which is very fair enough. But thankfully, quite a lot of people did stay, and ever since that episode that I put out and the next training talk, we've had quite a few people join, which is really good.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, we're sort of trending back in the right direction, and yeah, I make sure that the athletes that I coach are completely individualized and customized. I know one problem with the running space is that people that join coaches, they just give everyone the same plan, and that's definitely not what I think is the right practice. It's really important to understand the runner's background, to customize the training plan, understanding what really works for them, and more so how much training they've done in the past. You don't want to throw someone in the deep end and give them, big volume and really big sessions if they're doing their first or second marathon and they're not used to doing that. So I think it's really important to understand the background. And it's also important to understand what their goals are moving forward. So it's pretty simple. It's just very customized. But I do offer all athletes that I coach calls as well. I think that's really important. People find a lot of motivation and inspiration from jumping on a call and talking through their goals and planning through and talking about the training and planning it. So yeah, I really enjoy coaching. It's really fulfilling for me, and there's really no better feeling of helping someone over a long period of time and watching them maybe fail a couple of times, but then they finally reach their goal that they've been shooting for a while. That's something that really yeah, it really interests me. So yeah, it's something that I'll keep doing, and I really enjoy doing it.
great. And if people want to contact you about coaching, how do they go about that?
Yeah, we have a website. It's the Sweat Elite Coaching Academy. All the information is on there, so you can find pricing and all the details. I always put my email out there as well if people want to just email me directly, and it's matt@sweatelite .co, not .com. So Sweat Elite is just SWEATELITE. So yeah, they're the two ways that people predominantly reach out to me, or through Instagram. Even though I don't check Instagram DMs super frequently, I'm trying to avoid wasting too much time on that application. I think it's such a time suck. I'm if I have that on my
Yeah.
phone and don't put guardrails up, I end up spending too many hours on there, just rotting my mind away. So yeah, I think email and the website's the best way to contact me. And yeah, I have some openings at the moment. I'm looking forward to taking some people on board, especially people that are interested in the marathon and they want to really take it. Take a patient approach to it over a 6 to 12 month period. I'm not so interested in taking people on that want to stick around for just a couple of months, because I don't think
Mhm.
it's too difficult to tell how much
Yeah.
you can affect just a few months. But I think a 6 month window or more is really a good amount of time to test the waters over a strategy. So yeah, mostly interested in people wanting to improve over a 6 to 12 month plus period.
Yeah. I hope people will reach out, and I'm curious. Obviously super curious to follow your journey going forward. It's gonna be, I think it's gonna be a great story. It already is, but like, yeah, uh, I'm sure that when you get back to that level and when you run your first or your next PB in the marathon, this is gonna be a very unique story for sure. Yeah,
Definitely.
so I appreciate you taking the time so much. It's been an hour and a half and more than that. But yeah, really appreciate the conversation and how open you've been about everything. So thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Christian. I really appreciate the invite, and good luck on your marathon session today. And I'll be following the path to the marathon in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Same with you.
I can't even imagine how it's been like for Matt the last 5 months. It's yeah, just horrible. But I really appreciate him being so open about all of these things, and I'm sure it's not the easiest to be so open about, but really appreciate him being so open about it. And we were talking about my long run and how that would go, and so I just came back home from this long run, and it was a really good one. It was kind of hard to start. I was saying that I would start at 4:10. I was trying to, but it was kind of hard to do, honestly. I was running a bit faster. Uh, I'm not sure if I'm super happy about the fact that I ran faster for the first 10K, but So first 10K ended up being more around 4 flat than it was around 410, and then a little bit faster for the next 10K, I think. But then the last 10K was definitely faster, hitting paces at or kilometers at 345 to 350 pace, and then some uphill at the end, which led to a more exhausted runner, aka me, and a bit of a slower kilometer on the last kilometer there. All in all, 356 average pace for 30 kilometers. I think that was a good test before the marathon. I realized after that, it kind of left me confused somehow. Like, not because it wasn't a good run, but more because I ran this with progression, and then it doesn't really tell me how fast I could actually go if I was just going a tiny bit faster from the very beginning and not as fast as I went at the end, because obviously pushing it down to what previously has been my 10K time costs more than like the marathon pace. So I don't really know where I'm at, honestly, but I am very, very happy with how things went and that run. So I'm excited about the run or the marathon that I'm running in a couple of weeks. Other than that, I think that it's important to just, at least for me, say thank you to Matt again for coming on and taking the time. We're probably up at almost 2 hours in total for this episode, and there's gonna be some of these episodes where I'll call it a bonus episode, not necessarily because there is something very different about them, but just because these days I have a lot of guests on and I want things to be pretty real time. And so I feel like it was pretty cool to have Matt as one of these bonus episodes for this week. And they will most likely be out on Saturdays when I have them. So just again, thank you, Matt, for everything that you shared. I'm very curious to follow his journey going forward. And I feel like this conversation with Matt was just another great example of how this podcast gives me so much more than maybe it gives you guys, because I get to know these amazing people, have great conversations. I get to learn so much, and I just really appreciate that. So obviously it's fun to see that it's growing in terms of the numbers, but now I feel like I know Matt. Like we have some kind of relationship or connection, and I just really appreciate that more than the actual numbers. So thank you, Matt. Thank you to all of the guests that have been on so far. I can't believe we're up at more than 40 episodes, and most of them have been with guests. So without the guests, this podcast wouldn't have been anything. Really appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. And again, if you haven't, please give this podcast a review and maybe share it with a friend. We'd really appreciate that. Okay, so next episode will be out on Monday again, as usual. So that will probably also be with a fairly fast runner. So stay tuned, and talk to you on Monday. You listen to the Marathon Podcast, brought to you by Wall Studio.